Track Editor is great for animators for working with characters or other animated features in 3D Studio Max. It displays all of the controllers by default in the transform tracks. Right now it's showing all of the transform controllers that are currently on this control object. What's great about Track Editor is that it's perfect for typing in the values and zeroing out objects as you work with them. Once this elbow's been bent, we can see that the Z rotation track has been changed to a value of 80. You could just right-click on it and choose Track Values to 0. It will then zero out that track. If we take multiple objects and rotate them and have them all selected, you'll see that Track Editor isn't displaying any extra tracks. This is because Track Editor groups tracks by their sub-anim path. This means that all of the zeroed rotation tracks are all shown in the same location. Right-clicking again and saying Track Values to 0 will zero out all of the objects currently picked. Once again, with multiple objects selected, we can also type in values by simply picking the track and then typing in a new value that we want. In this case, 0 is being added as an absolute value, and all the objects are being returned to 0. We can also offset all of the values in a relative way. So if we have 3 objects picked with different track values, we can turn off the absolute value, select, and we'll notice now that the spinner value says 0. This becomes an offset value. 3D Studio Max also shows a lot of tracks when tracks have been frozen. For each track, there's a position list or a rotation list, and then multiple controllers. Track Editor makes it simple to be able to navigate these and filter them so that you're only seeing the tracks that you want to work with. In this case, we can see that the base controller is a list controller. It has a frozen position controller and a zero position controller that we'll be animating on. The tracks are also color-coded. Dark gray tracks are tracks that can't be animated. In this case, because we have tracks inside of a list controller, the tracks get color coding of red and green. Red are tracks that are currently non-active, and green are tracks that are active in the controller list. Tracks that show up as yellow don't currently have a controller assigned to them, but can be animated. We also have icons being displayed to display a little bit more information about the tracks. Float tracks get our float icon, 0.3 values get our 0.3 tracks, lock tracks, transform tracks, and we can see what's going on in Track Editor very easily using these. Now we might want to do some locking on our character. If set up properly, tracks are usually locked on objects. Now if we open the dope sheet, this often isn't done in Max because it can take a long time. If we display the keyable tracks, you can see that actually locking them can take a long time, picking them and displaying them. To help clean up Track Editor for animators, we can do a couple of things. First off, hiding the parent tracks. We'll hide all the tracks that don't get animated. These are the tracks that are parents to the final controllers in the track stack. We can also then lock off tracks that will never be animated. For instance, the frozen position, the frozen rotation tracks, scale tracks if we don't want them. And here we can even see that there's some extra position tracks that are being displayed at the bottom. These haven't been grouped into the top ones because their sub-anim path isn't the same. These also, in this case, don't need to be animated. So I'm going to select all of those, right-click, and choose Toggle Keyable. In toggling Keyable, we can see that they now have the keyable icon turned off. I can then choose the filter for animated tracks. Selecting control objects then now only shows the tracks that are actually going to directly receive animation. And again, this really simplifies things and cleans things up. In this case, we have our FK arm system again selected, and our tracks. We could easily reset these by selecting and then shift selecting the last, typing in a value of 0, and making sure they've all been reset. Now these objects here really don't even need position tracks, so we can select all of these, right-click, and say Toggle Keyable again, and now they won't show up. Certain objects, for instance like the IK-FK arm on the other side, in the IK mode, we need both position and rotation to show up for this object. So if we were to move this object and rotate it, we can see that the tracks are changing values. If we then go over and pick the controls on the other side that are only showing the rotation tracks, we can see that we can see both. We can see that the position track on the left arm is showing up, And all of the rotation tracks for all 4 of them are now grouped together. Once again, we can reset easily by typing in 0. Once tracks are animated as well, we can also filter them out. Turn on animate, and we've animated, for instance, the rotation of these objects. And we can do that easily in Track Editor by right-clicking and scrubbing on any track, and we can easily go about animating them. If we turn off both of the filters for hide parent tracks and filter for animated tracks, you can see now that the color coding slightly changed. Some of the tracks are coming up bright red, and when I scrub, you'll notice that they turn dark red or a darker red. That indicates that there are keys when it's bright red and no keys when there's not. So animated tracks turn up red in Track Editor. Now we can also just use a filter here and say only filter for animated tracks. So if I turn that on, you'll see that the tracks for the rotations on these objects show up. But in this case, we only animated one track, and so only the Z rotation track is showing up. If we go over to the far object on the other hand, you'll notice that no animation was ever placed on it, so no tracks are showing up. Animating it and then reselecting it will then of course now show up tracks on that track as well. This can make it very fast, very simple for animators to work with all these tracks of animation in Max, whereas in the past it's been very difficult to be able to manage and work with them. We could twist the entire body of this character, for instance, by picking all of its control objects. I can turn off the keyable and just go in about animating, for instance, the twist. This will automatically key the object, and it will now show up as animated tracks just in the X track. Track Editor also has a couple other features for dealing with animation. For instance, when scrubbing on tracks, they might move faster than you like, depending on the scale of the scene. This can often happen with position objects. In this case, it's working pretty good as I scrub side to side. But we can do a couple of things. One, we can hold down Alt, slow down the scrubbing. We can hold down Control to speed up the scrubbing. And under Options, we also have multiplier values to speed up and slow down that action. If we choose a multiplier of 10 and right-click and scrub, we'll notice it's moving very quickly. Control and Alt still have an effect, Control speeding it up and Alt slowing it down. Or we could decide that we want to work in very, very small values and set the multiplier value to 0.1. And this will greatly slow down the scrubbing of side to side. But again, Alt and Control both have an effect on it. Often with characters like this, custom attributes are used to be able to house custom attribute values for working with the character. We can show those by making sure that the Show Custom Attribute Properties is turned on. In this case, you notice that we can't see the blend for the IK-FK system on the left arm. That's because it's currently housed on a modifier, so we'd have to say Show Modifier Properties as well. When we turn that on, we can also now see that there are many tracks of animation on the X form as well as the custom attribute holder. The custom attribute holder currently has a blend value. Type in 0, and then we could type in 100 and set it over to FK. So we can even adjust the IK-FK values. Because those tracks of animation are now animated on the blend system, we can also go back and turn on Filter for Animated Tracks, having the modifiers turned on and the Show Custom Attribute Properties turned on, and now we can see that track of animation as well. Animators often want to be able to open up Curve Editor and be able to see the curves for the selected tracks. This can also be done through Track Editor. In this case, down through the body, we've animated all of the rotation tracks. We could select all those, right-click, and say Select in Track View. Select in Track View will open up Curve Editor and show all those tracks already selected for you. This makes it fast and simple to be able to get all the curves and work with your tangent handles. There's also other features. For instance, we could also use a set key. So if we're in a position where we want to set a key without changing the value, we can select the tracks, right-click, and say Set Key, and a new key is set on those tracks. We can also select the keys down in the track bar by saying Select All Keys. This will select all of the keys in the track bar. There's also Select Keys in Range. What this will do is it'll only select the keys inside of the current range bar. You can see that the last key didn't get selected. We can also say Select Keys at Time. So if we go to a specific time, right-click, we can say Select Keys at Time, and now all of the keys for those tracks are now selected. There's also a Delete Selected Keys and a Delete All Keys. All of these tools together can make Track Editor an excellent tool for animators.